So hey everybody, we're live. I know everybody's grabbing some food still, so while you are sitting down and eating, I'm going to start yelling at you. If you're here for Django Girls Install, raise your hand, because I just want to tell you you are in the right place. Yes, okay, so you're in the right place. We're going to do the Django Girls Install Fest in one of these rooms, basically right after all these announcements. So welcome to Tulsa Web Devs, the March meetup. Thanks for joining us. We're here thanks to sponsors. So where's Pearson? There he is. So Pearson and Tech Systems brought the food. Yay, thank you, Pearson. And then Blixa and his company Project Make It are doing the streaming. So thank you, Blixa and Project Make It. And then volunteers, speakers, Techlahoma. So Techlahoma is a nonprofit volunteer-run organization that puts on 39 groups, 2 conferences, and sponsors free local events. We do all this to support our mission to advance the grassroots technology community of Oklahoma. You can learn more at techlahoma.org. It's very important for us that everyone feels safe and respected at these events. So if you have an issue with someone's behavior at a Techlahoma Foundation event, let us know. There's an incident report form on techlahoma.org. It's at the bottom at the report an incident. It's very small, but if you do have an incident with someone, let us know immediately. There's an entire team that takes our code of conduct really seriously, and they are very responsive, very helpful if you feel unwelcome or unsafe at any time. If you'd like to get more involved with Techlahoma, go to helpwanted.techlahoma.org. You can find ways that you can volunteer. If you want to support Techlahoma, you can go to techlahoma.org/donate and sign up for a monthly subscription. 36 Degrees North donates the space. I can't see who's at the desk. Is anyone at the desk? Levi. Yay. Thank you. Thank you, Levi. Thank you, 36 Degrees North. So they donate the space for us to meet. They also offer free workshops as well as co-working desks and offices for monthly fees. So you can find out more info with Levi at the front desk. And I think that's it on our customary intro. So straight into dates. March 12th, which has already happened, right? So that was the lightning talk night, March 12th. Is Max here? He said he was going to be here, but I don't see him. So I was going to ask him to summarize. We are coming up. Yes, so Wednesday is March 20th. That's free co-working here at 36 Degrees North. So if you've wondered what it's like to do co-working here, have a co-working membership, on Wednesday you can come in, it's free. You can work out in this space. They have the coffee and the Wi-Fi free all day. So drop by and check that out. This weekend we are doing Django Girls Tulsa. So like I said, if you're here for the Install Fest, we're gonna get started in a minute. You're in the right place. Tulsa Lambda Lunch is March 26th. I don't see if Darren or anyone involved with Lambda Lunch is here. Nope. But they will have a talk March 26th. It will be here. It will be in the classroom. It is pure functional programming web apps in AWS Lambda using HTTP 4S.
That was last month.
Oh, then it's not that. It's something else. But try to fit that on a streaming title.
Oh, we tried it. It didn't work.
All right, so am I missing? Oh, you know what I am missing? 200 OK. So 200 OK is coming up. It is May 17th. Put it on your calendar now. We are about to announce our speaker lineup. Well, tonight we're actually going through picking speakers. Thank you, Kendall. And we will announce the speakers and open tickets. I think it should be within a week or two, basically as soon as we confirm all the speakers. But Jeremy had the good idea. Maybe we should just open them early because some people come no matter who the speakers are. So just keep an eye on all of the Tulsa Web Devs channels of your choice. And we should be blasting that out there to everybody. But put May 17th on your calendar. Save that day. It's a Friday. It's a great day to tell your boss, like, hey, I'm going to go to this conference. It's lots of really good tech training right here in Tulsa, so you don't have to fly. You don't have to get a hotel. You just come over to the library, hang out, get some great talks in. And license plates. Kendall, you want to come up and talk about license plates? Well, you have to, right?
I have applications, and we will mail them, and we have stamps for you.
So,
Would you like to fill out an application for a Techlahoma license plate?
yes, I think it's still on the Up, 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 up. Where's the banner? Where's the banner? Here, let me just look for it. Oh, it's not on the front page? It's gone forever now. I saw this here. News? No, or I can't spell the word license plate. Okay, so there's a Techlahoma license plate. It will help us make money, basically, but we have to have at least 100 people purchase it before they will start printing it. And so we have some number of signups that have already purchased one, and we need to get up to 100 within a month or two, something like that. Yep. And so we have, what?
Within a month.
Within a month. So do it tonight. Kendall has the forms. She will help you get through the forms, and we have envelopes and everything, so you can just fill out the forms while you're here, and we will take care of mailing it. Yes? And then license-plate. Yep. So this is the sample, what it looks like. Ooh, nice, fancy. It has the nice little tech spaghetti that everybody loves coming out of the side of it. So, okay, anything else I'm missing? License plate, 200 okay, those are the biggies. I guess that's it. Oh, I should pitch this. TU Cyber Summit. I don't know if there's a lot of tickets left. But TU is hosting Cyber Summit. Registration is now closed, but I think if you ask at the 36 Degrees North front desk, they may have an in on some tickets if you still want to go, especially if you're a member here. So if you're a member here, I think we have some kind of channel to get some tickets for you from Cox or something. I'm looking at Levi. I don't know if he... Okay. I thought I saw it on the 36 Slack, but maybe I didn't. So that is it, right? Okay, cool. So now what we do, we break out. We usually have some sub-sessions. Tonight, we have lightning talks, and then we have a couple of other mini sessions. So Carlos, you want to talk about Code for Tulsa mini session?
Chris here?
Chris?
There you are. Hi.
Does Chris want to get up and talk with you?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Are you going to pull up any websites on my...
Oh, no, that's cool. In January, we started working again with Hunger Free Oklahoma to revamp the summer meals map, which is a map where families can find out where to get meals for their family if their kids are on free and reduced lunch program. So Chris is going to be going over kind of an introductory slide deck of getting the project together. So we're going to kind of powwow around that. And is Todd here? Todd's not here. But if he gets here later, we're going to be talking about working with Hunger Free Oklahoma on another project, which is a SNAP screener, which screens families to let them know if they're available to receive SNAP benefits. So if you're interested in that, we'll probably just meet here in Video North just to really quickly go over the slide deck and kind of powwow on those two projects. So, and then we want to make it back for lightning talks as quickly as we can. So.
Okay, and then Patrick, I saw you here. Where's Patrick? You come up and talk about the Python. You have to come here because this is where the streaming and everything, everybody can hear it here. So you have to, yes. The people want to hear your tones, your dulcet tones. Oh yeah, if you have a lightning talk, get ready to come up here.
All right. I guess my thing's a lightning talk as well.
Is it?
I mean, I was the first one to put a talk up, and I put mini session.
Okay.
So it's a rebranded lightning talk. It shouldn't it shouldn't be too long. Just starting doing some Python talks at Tulsa Web Devs. I'm going to go over maybe 3 standard library modules in Python that I find interesting, and I'll just continue to do stuff like that every Tulsa Web Devs, hopefully.
All right, so that one's going to be a lightning talk. So we'll really only have the 3 breakouts maybe. The Django Girls Install Fest. So if anybody walked in and is here for Django Girls, raise your hand. Anybody? Okay, 1, 2, 3. Okay, so for Django Girls Install Fest, we will probably go into this room if it's empty. Carlos, is it empty? Not Video North. Yep, all right. So we'll probably go in there, and I'll help you get stuff installed. How many Django Girls coaches do we have here tonight? 1, 2. These are the coaches or students? Okay, coaches, raise your hand. All right, we've got 3. And then how many students? We have 2 students. Sweet. Students. Higher teacher to student ratio than I've ever seen before. So yeah, so we'll have plenty of help for any students that are here and want to get started installing. It doesn't really take the whole like hour or whatever. It usually takes, 15, 20 minutes, something like that. And then lightning talks. So if you have a lightning talk, if you're giving a lightning talk tonight, whether or not it's on this list, because I think there's 1 or 2 that I think I slacked with people and they didn't officially put themselves on the list yet. Yeah, and you have to let Blixa know too. So I'm going to give a really fast talk about HTTP, just some of the underused features of HTTP. That's it. That's my lightning talk. Anyone else want to come up and pitch their lightning talk? Dylan, Daniel, Dungan. Where'd Dungan go? He's hiding. Get up here.
Hi, my name is Dylan. I'm going to give a quick talk about AWS Lex bots and Lambda functions. They connect. So it's how to build a chat bot. They can integrate with a web app, with Facebook, Messenger, and contact centers. So it's using AWS, some of the same smarts that powers Alexa, basically, for natural language processing.
Wow, do I have to sing? This is oh, hello. For anybody who's been hacking for a long time, I think I found one of the solutions for quick hacks. It's a library called TinyDB. It's just for fun, and I will show you how I use it. That's it.
And I'm going to do a lightning talk on dark launching to apps at scale, so you can get code out there in the wild without releasing it to everyone all at once. You just slowly drip it out. Hope it'll be helpful and useful.
You have to say your name.
Oh, right. Martyn Chamberlin.
My name is Daniel Ashcraft. I will be showing you how, when your employer comes to you and says, hey, we want to take advantage of GraphQL, you can be super lazy and just wrap a REST API with GraphQL.
Any others that are not on the list that I forgot? Did anyone just overcome with inspiration, come up with a lightning talk on the spot that they want to give tonight? Okay. All right, so that sounds like that's going to be our lineup. Like I said, what we'll do is video. Carlos, you wanted to take video north right here for Code for Tulsa. Yeah. So Code for Tulsa is going to be meeting in video north. If you're here for Django Girls installation, we'll go to the small conference room over there. I will go back there, but I'm also giving a lightning talk, so I might have to double duty on that real quick. And then the lightning talks will be out here. And do you want to run the lineup for lightning talks and just, do you have them all queued up? Yeah. Okay, so you can tell us which order we should all be going in? Yeah. Okay. You cool with being first? Sure, and then I'll run in there real fast afterwards. Okay, cool. So grab some more food, grab a drink or something. We will start with lightning talks. Wow, we finished announcements really early, so we've got up to 9 minutes, but we'll get started right at 6:30. Code for Tulsa and Video North, Django Install Fest in the small conference room, and then the lightning talks will start here at 6:30. So grab everything you need. Thank you again for coming, and we'll see you in 9 minutes. Hey, okay, so I'm going to get us started. I'm going to go probably pretty quick because I just started these slides like a couple days ago and haven't put a whole lot into them, so they might be short, which is kind of the idea here, right? All right, so how many people know what HTTP stands for? How many people don't know anything about HTTP? That's fine. So my first class was called a webmaster class at TCC in 1998, and it blew my mind when they talked about this thing called the client-server model. So If you don't know how the internet works, you should come to Django Girls or go through the Django Girls tutorial. I guess almost none of you are girls, sorry, so you can't come. But so the internet is basically a lot of servers out there, and then the clients are your web browsers, your devices, all that kind of stuff. And HTTP stands for, anyone know, who wants to say what it stands for? That was amazing. That you all started completely out of sync, and you somehow ended saying the word protocol at the same time. That was incredible. Okay, so yeah, hypertext transfer protocol. Because hypertext markup language is HTML, and so how are you going to transfer all of that hypertext markup language down to clients? You're going to use the hypertext transfer protocol. So that's what HTTP stands for. So a diagram of all those things we all just said together. The HTTP request is sent from a computer, it goes to a server, and it gets an HTTP response. So every single client, every single browser, every single mobile device, every single, usually apps also speak HTTP. That's all good. So for me, for a long time, HTTP was just how Python or PHP or Ruby or whatever backend language I was using would ship all of my HTML or CSS or JavaScript, whatever front-end languages I was using, down to the client. Okay, so like I said, this is going to be a really short talk. We're all done. But no, we're not done, because of course, there's a whole lot more. So if you haven't looked into all of the sort of mechanisms or all of the features that are available to HTTP, and all you've ever done is treat it as the thing that gets your HTML down to clients, you should really just go through this page on HTTP headers on MDN. It's also grouped into all of these functional areas. So like authentication or caching or downloads, redirects, security, server sent events, all these sort of things are actually features of HTTP that you could be using. And what's kind of cool is if you actually use these features of HTTP and don't build them yourself, then a lot of the intermediaries between your server and the clients will help you do this, right? So things like CDNs, things like proxies, all of that, they are built considering that you are using HTTP correctly. And if you do, you'll get a lot of help from all of those things. So all of those things are way too many to cover. I thought I would cover the top 10, but I can't even cover that, mostly because I ran out of time putting together slides. So we're going to chop it down to the top 5. These are the top 5 articles on MDN by traffic underneath the HTTP section. So I just decided, okay, what are the most popular articles? Let's talk about those ones. So the first one, there's an article about CORS. So CORS stands for Cross-Origin Resource Sharing, and the HTTP headers are access control allow, and then there's a few other terms that come after that we'll talk about. I'm going to steal some slides from another talk that I have about security errors. So if you don't already know this, who knows the same origin policy or has run into the same origin policy? Okay, so if you're trying to access resources on some other origin from code that came from a first origin, that's not going to work. It's a security feature built into the web. This is what it looks like if you do it, even if you're slideshare.net. It's disallowed by browsers. So the problem here is that if you allowed this, you could be sitting on a site like evilcorp.com, and it could be making requests to bankofamerica.com and basically grabbing data out of bankofamerica.com and then sending your bank data basically to their own site or any other site they wanted to. So that's why this is disallowed. So the fix, if you need to do this, is to use these CORS headers, right? So what happens here is on the server where resources are going to be requested, you add that HTTP header, access control, allow origin from site.a.com. So if you own maptiles.com and you own site.a.com, you can instruct the browser to trust maptiles.com when it is sitting on site.a.com. You can say, yes, these are the same sites. They should be, the resources should be allowed between them, right? Okay, so that was that one. I have a really bad transition because don't have time. So the next one was X-frame options. So who has used X-frame options? Okay, cool. So you should be using the header content security policy now. You can go ahead and set this one because you need it for older browsers. But the X-frame options is a HTTP response header that tells the browser if this content can be iframed somewhere else, right? What you want to do is you usually want to just deny, or you want to say same origin only. So if you really need your content to be iframed on your own website, that's fine. You can send same origin. You can send deny. I would say you can send allow from, but that's not actually supported by most browsers because they've moved on to content security policy. So the attack here, I didn't have time to like put the code in, but essentially if someone can iframe your content, they can also bring in CSS that overlays a whole bunch of different UI elements on top of your elements. And so it looks like a username and password box. They overlay that on top of your stuff. And when you're clicking, you think you're clicking username and password, and so you type in your username and password on some site, and really it gets clickjacked. So this is called a clickjacking attack, where you basically bring in somebody else's page behind the, or in front of the page underneath it that's actually getting the form events, right? So that's why you should be denying your site from being iframed. What you really want to do, though, is use content security policy and say frame ancestors, none, or self is basically what you want to do. And if you do both of those, you'll be hitting all of the browsers. Oh yeah, status codes. Okay, so yeah, funny American Chopper meme. You get slash, there's a 404, then you try to get index, 500 internal server. Okay, fine, be that way. So status codes, they're actually, there's a rhyme and reason to them. If you haven't seen this before, the 100s are informational, 200s are successful, 300s are redirects, 400s means there was an error in the client's request, and then 500 means there was an error on the server side, right? So this is how you should be using this stuff. Some of the underused status codes, 100 continue is actually really useful if your client-side code wants to, for example, post like a 2 GB video file, but before it runs into a server-side error, you want to just pretend that you're going to send that. So a look before you leap request, where you say head. You can send a head request or an options request, and you can say, this is what I was about to try, and the server can say 100 continue, yeah, that's good. I can take 2 GB files, or you can reject before it goes through the trouble of trying to upload a 2 GB file. So that's a good one. 202 is nice if you have async operations on your backend. So a request comes in and it triggers an async operation. 202 can trigger like, yes, I got that, I accepted it. I'm not going to give you the response yet. And then 204, no content, use that if someone had the URL right, but there really is nothing there. 304, not modified, that helps with caching. 401, unauthorized, you need to supply a username and password. 409, conflict. If a post is basically violating like a unique constraint on your database, you can tell someone, hey, you're trying to repost the same thing or something like that. And then 410, gone, is yes, there used to be something here, but now it's not here, instead of just a 404. That's the teapot? Yep. So 418 is teapot. It is very underused. I have yet to see it. MIME types, I think this might be the last one. This stands for multi-purpose internet mail extensions. What a MIME type is basically the type of content, and it goes into types and subtypes. So the major type groups are applications, audios, fonts, images, text, video. And then underneath that, you would say there's certain text, which is HTML, CSS, JavaScript. There's also images like GIFs or GIFs or YIFs, or whatever you're going to say. Image, JPEG, PNG, all that kind of stuff. So you specify this in the content type HTTP response header. The bonus here is content disposition is another header. And if you want to actually like serve an HTML file as an attachment that gets downloaded and not rendered by the browser, you would say content type is text HTML, but the content disposition is as an attachment, right? So this is how you can actually you can use content disposition attachment to trigger the save as dialog, all that good stuff. So yes, I got it. Okay, that was the top 5. And that's it. That's the lightning talk. Where's Blixa? Is it good to just yank this? Is that all right? Yeah. Okay. All right, who's next? You're running the show. All right.
Can everybody see that? Yep. All right, clearly, all right. So Luke had slides. I thought 10, 15 minutes, I don't need any slides. I talk too much as it is. If I have slides, I'm going to slow down. And that probably won't be good for anybody because it'll be an hour and a half later. This is also my first talk for those of you that have watched any streams from Techlahoma in the past. This is my first talk in probably about a year or so. I used to run a free code camp down in Oklahoma City, where I would talk almost every Sunday. And on the drive up here, I was thinking to myself, sure, I've done so many talks in the past. Every single Sunday, I would do the introduction. I would go over the topics. I would talk anything related to the topic we were discussing that day. And on the way up here, I'm like, surely I won't get nerves. I sat down here after my second Red Bull, and I was like hyperventilating. I was like, okay, so this is a skill you have to repeat and you have to do over and over again. So if you haven't given a talk, the second Red Bull did it. That's what it was. And, in the caffeine and the thermogenic, and yes. So with that being said, if you haven't done a talk yet and you're nervous about it, just give one. They're great. They're a learning opportunity, and you never know who may use that information. So give talks. They're great. Today I'm going to be talking about a really quick introduction to the bare minimum of GraphQL. This is not a talk about GraphQL, but it's important for me to give a precursor for those that aren't familiar. Real quick, if you've heard of GraphQL, stare at me with a blank face. I'm going to smile and nod in your direction. Awesome. If you've never heard of GraphQL, just stare with a blank face, and I'm going to smile and nod in your direction. Excellent. GraphQL is essentially an alternative to REST. With the traditional REST API, you send a request, and however you've programmed it, whatever keys you've defined in that request or in that particular resolver, that function is going to come back. So if you send a request off to get user on a REST API endpoint, it will send back whatever the programmer has created, whatever object he has decided to send back. So I don't know if you have run into this before, where you have a get user object and it comes back with a password from the database because you get every single key off the database. Well, normally you see a lot of delete user.password or user.password equals null or user.password equals empty string. With GraphQL, it's a little different. With GraphQL, you tell GraphQL server what keys you want back, and it does the rest. It does more than that, but that is essentially what GraphQL is. So instead of saying get user, throw back all this stuff, I may only use one or two keys, you say get user, I only want the name back, and it will only send the name back. So kind of think of it as it will automatically filter the keys for you. And we have some tooling that will allow us to make use of this with existing REST APIs so that, like I said when I did my small intro up here, we can be super lazy. Your employer comes up here and he hands you the almighty Swagger file. And the Swagger file has every endpoint known to man. Entreport's a cool little content management system on top of WordPress, but they have a really awesome Swagger file. And every single one of these has their own definitions, right? This is a pretty traditional REST API. It is a lot. It is a lot to consume if you are a person who wants to integrate this into their own system. This may be any other third-party API. REST APIs, whenever you're integrating them, they're difficult to consume. They are also not strictly typed. So when you hit a REST API endpoint, if they've decided that 1 is going to be true, 0 is going to be false, instead of true is being false, or true is being true and false is false, deal with it. That's just how they send the data. And if all of your API integrations decide to handle things in different ways, maybe they put true in a string, that would be awesome. Too bad. With GraphQL specifically, the language is strictly typed. So if you say it's a string and it comes back as not a string, GraphQL will throw a fit, which is kind of what we want. We don't want our third-party APIs behaving badly with data. We want to know when they're not doing something correct, so we can send nice little messages to their developers saying, hey, you did something wrong. So to get into the general topic of today, GraphQL, strictly typed, cool query language, different from REST API. The tool that I want to talk about specifically is GraphQL Yoga. Now, back to the original statement. Your employer comes up to you and says, hey, we already have a REST API. We like our REST API, but there's a new cool thing called GraphQL, and we want to be hip, and we want to go attract potential investors in San Francisco. So we need to do this thing. We need to do it in the next 4 or 5 days because we already have an API. You can nod your head and go, sure, sounds great. Sounds like a Monday. The tool we have here is pretty neat. If you've never seen an index.js file with only one dependency, that's an index.js file or a package.json file with one dependency. I will go, yeah, yay, right? You never see it, but I went ahead and I was like, we'll throw it in there. This is their typing system, and I'm gonna blow that up because that's a little too much. Everybody see that? All right. Oh, by the way, we will have live coding today, and if this doesn't go wrong, it will be like I am being blessed. So at some point, I expect something to go wrong. We'll deal with it. This is an example of their typing system. They support most JavaScript primitives. You can also declare your own types. So a very common one you'll see is like a scalar datetime. And then even worse is you'll see people do something like this. And this basically means I don't even want to type this. Just give me back a JSON payload. That's bad, but it's like when a TypeScript developer types things and you see like any everywhere, that's the GraphQL equivalent to that. Anyway, so with GraphQL, we strictly type and we define everything. So it's to a certain extent, depending on your naming conventions, self-documenting, which is also kind of neat. There are several tools that allow you to inspect the schema, similar to doing like code inspection in VS Code or Visual Studios. And this syntax to me kind of reminded me of the C# modeling. I don't know if you guys see that, and I'm sure C# developers are like nodding their, shaking their head, no, this is not C#. It kind of reminded me of modeling data in C# for an ORM, like Entity Framework or something similar. So in this particular instance, for the simplest, most basic one, I've got more advanced ones, so if this is too basic, the next one is going to hurt. This one in particular, I'm just saying, hey, we're going to have a quote-unquote endpoint. It's going to be a query, right, like a GET request, and it's going to be called hello. It takes a parameter called name, and it sends back a response, and the response is going to be a string. This is very similar to an interface. GraphQL also supports interfaces. It also supports fragments. So it's very OOP in that nature. Once again, I think similar to C#. The magic happens in here. So let me make that a little bit smaller so you can see all the code it took to write this super awesome API. All right, that's it. That's for this particular example, that's it. And this is not a REST API yet. The next one, a little bit more difficult. Here's our query. It's just a function called hello. Name's got to match, right? Because it's checking that. In this case, it's going to return the key res, and it's going to respond with a string takes your name. I have it started because I try not to let things break when I'm in the middle of talking. So I went ahead and made this simple example, and it responds back. This is an example of the query language, by the way. You send in an object, and you tell it what query, mutation, etc. you want to run, pass in the parameters. The parameters are strictly typed. If I go in here and I try to change this to something else, it's going to throw a fit, right? The response, if I try to come in here and say, hey, I want a key other than response. I want name back. It's going to throw a fit. It is strictly typed. Again, it is strictly typed. So this is cool and all, but once again, we got to wrap a REST API. Slightly more difficult than a traditional hello world. So that's when we can come over here to another file I've created, and if there's enough interest, I'll throw these up on GitHub and let you pull them down. That way you have some of this example code. I've done this at this point in time about 6 or 7 times for third-party integrations because it makes it fairly easy to do so. If you've done third-party integrations, use this tool because it's super cool. This one obviously has 3 dependencies. I know, more than one. This one, the Prisma client library, is actually not required. If I erased it, it wouldn't do anything. But node fetch is, because now we're going to get data from a REST API. This can also be done on the same server, and you can request resources locally. So if you want to put in a select from a SQL or something like that, you can. The real magic in this, once again, is going to be schema. I've defined my queries. I've modeled my data. I'll go over some of this in just a second in brevity because I know I'm probably running late on time already, and somebody's going to start shaking their head at me. But essentially, I've modeled my data. And this is all coming from JSON placeholder. So this is where this comes from. And I can look at the keys. I can identify the type, just like your Swagger file or et cetera. You can check your keys, check your type, get an example. Over here is where I actually write the code for each particular one. The one I'll do real quick because, once again, low on time, is going to be to-dos. I've made some conditional filters. They are not required, which is why you see these magic statements to say, you know, filter if it exists. If it doesn't, just give me the whole array back. But in general, all it does is it fetches from the REST API, returns the full object from the REST API, and then that's it. That's because GraphQL, when the response is coming out, automatically filters based on the type schema you've told it to expect. So it will only show the keys that you've typed. So if you say user ID exists and you query for user ID and it comes back, it will show it to you. If you don't, it just doesn't show it to you. So this is a server. So this is a server-side filtering system in and of itself. So if you don't want to request a third-party resource, you want it to have to go through your API and integrate, you can do it server-side. They do have client-side libraries. I have a friend who's using IndexedDB, which is kind of similar like local storage, to do something similar to this with GraphQL query language. 5 minutes. Thank you, sir. I appreciate the heads up. Back to it. Yes, it's just a layer on top of the REST API, but it's still server-side. So this, in fact, just a little side note real quick. It is built on top of Node and Express. So it still accepts middleware, authentication, passport, all of the standard Express middleware you may expect. You can still add REST API routes to this if you want to. So this is a full-fledged, server-side API system. It's full-fledged, exactly that. It's Express. The difference is just that this particular implementation is query language, GraphQL. So anyway, so I didn't do any magic things here. I did a standard fetch request. I said, go and hit this API. I kind of know what the data is going to look like, and I only want these keys. Do the thing. I didn't do any magic except for what I would normally do if it's client side. GraphQL is going to do the filtering on those keys for me. And as soon as I'm going to stop the other one. I'll go ahead and refresh. And it'll throw a fit because it doesn't exist. So I've defined to-dos, and it is doing the type ahead for me, similar to a strongly typed language like TypeScript. I can identify the schema over here. This is part of that self-documenting thing. So if you have front-end developers who need to integrate with this, you can give them this particular link, which is called GraphQL Playground. There's also GraphIQL, or Graphql. And they can use this on the client side in order to integrate with it. You don't have to use a Swagger generator or something similar to that and pass off documentation. As long as you have generally good naming conventions, it's self-documenting. Obviously, it can be pretty terrible if you don't have good naming conventions. Get fruit and it returns names will not be a great naming convention. You can also look at the types this way, which is how you would normally do it if you were going to integrate with a third-party API or something similar. So to-dos has a user ID, ID, title, and completed, which is a Boolean. This is off of the third-party REST API. It will only return IDs. It will only return user IDs. That is GraphQL. No more delete password, password equals null, none of that. You only tell it the object you want and sends it back. Now, that's pretty much the time I have available for my talk. This gets intensely more complicated, obviously, like everything else in life. This can become as convoluted as you want it to be. I have a more strenuous example here, which is a rough way to do nested queries. Another thing with GraphQL is you can say, give me a user and all the posts related to them. If the relationship is defined, it will do the thing. In this case, with the REST API, I have to do that manually. There's also something else called schema stitching. It's where you can take two REST APIs and can delegate a query to the other one, and it will just automatically bring the two together and return the keys you select, which sounds really complicated now that I say it out loud. Let's just say it's really cool. You know, to-dos have posts. Give me all the posts along with the to-dos. It will do that for you. The downside to using GraphQL Yoga specifically in this particular use case is that obviously the REST API is still returning the full object. You're still hitting the server for that full object, right? So the REST API is still getting hammered. It doesn't have any of the normal benefits a full-fledged GraphQL server would. A full-fledged GraphQL server has a select, and it brings in only those keys, so it's a little bit more efficient. Obviously, it's also another network request, so any latency in the network is going to affect it. So there are some caveats, but if you want to be like me and you're super lazy and you want to wrap third-party APIs in GraphQL and stitch them into your own stuff, you can do it in a couple lines of JavaScript. It is pretty easy, and I like JavaScript better than I like messing with third-party APIs. So as far as that goes, that's all the time I have today. Super quick introduction to GraphQL Yoga and GraphQL as a query language in general. If you need more information, let me know on Slack. I will send you the files, and I'll also explain anything else that I may have breezed over or hand-waved in this particular topic. So, my name on Slack is Ashcraft. You may have seen me. I'm active on the general channel, JavaScript channel, and also the Starspace 46 channel. My office is at Starspace 46. My name is Daniel Ashcraft, and my business is Of Ash and Fire, web software and mobile development. So GraphQL for sure. Thank you guys very much. I hit.
Thank you for coming from Oklahoma City.
Yeah, no problem.
All right. Ooh. We have. All right, guys. I am going to take us quickly through this one. Let's see if I can. Can I do this? Like this?
Hold on. Yeah, it does not.
It's a nice mic.
It is. Where's the logo?
Are we good? Okay, guys. Well, I'm going to talk tonight about dark launching with chess.com. So first of all, what is chess.com? I just want to give a quick introduction to the website. It's the #1 website and mobile platform for playing the game of chess. If you like to play chess, I recommend checking out chess.com. It has about 27 million registered users, 3 million games played every day. It's about the top 500th website in the United States and worldwide. It's translated in a lot of different languages. And I think of it as kind of a medium-sized fish in a big pond. And it's a fully remote. It doesn't have any headquarters. In fact, I'm the only Oklahoma employee. So, all right, so let's talk about our subject here. It's a serious undertaking introducing change in software if you've ever tried to do that before, especially when you have a pre-existing user base, and especially if that pre-existing user base is really large. And the bigger your app, the more things that you're going to have to think about as you get this thing ready. So what's the right approach? How do you ensure a smooth rollout? And how quickly can you respond to user feedback? And if you need to have a revert, how can you do reverts? At chess.com, we use an iterative approach with continuous deployment that allows us to assemble bits of change gradually behind what we call feature flags without millions of users noticing. And how many of you guys have heard about either dark launching or feature flags? How many of you guys have used dark launching or feature flags? Nice. Awesome. Okay, so once it's fully baked and we're happy with it, we're ready to slowly release it to our users. It's called dark launching, and it's a rock-solid pattern to have in your toolbox regardless of where your application is at. Now, what is dark launching? Here, I got a verbose definition here I just grabbed off Google. Dark launching is the practice of deploying the very first version of a service into its production environment well before release so that you can soak test it and find any bugs before you make its functionality available to users. So that's kind of a mouthful. I like to think of it as two things, really. Releasing new work, first of all, in incremental steps, and then releasing those changes to a subset of users. Now, when should you use dark launching? Well, I would say anything that's big enough to involve more than one pull request is a good candidate to use dark launching for, especially as your website gets larger or your app. And then any major refactor or any new feature. When would you not want to use dark launching? Well, maybe for small bug fixes or small improvements. Now let's look at those two aspects of dark launching a bit more closely. First of all, releasing in incremental steps. Looks a lot like lots of little pull requests. Instead of a big massive pull request that takes forever to review, and if you've got a really quickly changing master branch, you've got all these other developers that are making changes and you're having to merge conflicts regularly and all these kinds of things. Instead, just have lots of small pull requests that you're constantly merging into master. And then those things are only a few hundred lines of code. And then the second thing, which is what we're going to mostly talk about here real quick, is releasing that to a subset of users. And again, we use this feature flags ability at chess.com. It's just a Boolean attribute that's user-specific, and it can be flipped without requiring a fresh deploy. A feature flag's truthness determines what code path executes for a given user for a specific aspect of the app. Now, if that's clear as mud, then we'll look at an example. Maybe that'll kind of help make sense. So recently, we did a complete overhaul of our daily chess page. We wanted it to look like this. And that's what it looks like now. But it needed to have a few things. Faster time to interactive, TTI. That's when you request a page, how fast can you actually do something on the page. It needed some new features, cleaner code, better unit test coverage, and most importantly, an all-new design. And we knew the overhaul was going to take months to complete, and we wanted to release it very slowly. A lot of users, lots of games. In other words, we didn't want it to release to 100% of production traffic all at once. Both the old and the new code bases need to be fully in parallel at the same time. After all, daily chess, it's the second most used feature on the website. Thousands of new games start every day. Super high visibility. It's kind of scary. So this was a perfect candidate for dark launching. Now, to illustrate just how important this can be if you don't do it, I want to wind the clocks back to 2015. It's when I first started working at chess.com, and I was tasked to convert our thing into a single-page application in Angular 1. We were just talking about Angular 1. We used to use Angular 1 on chess.com. There's a lot of people that used to do things in Angular 1, or wish that it was a used to. But I didn't build it with dark launching in mind. So this pull request had 6,000 lines of additions and about 3,300 lines of deletions. It was a massive pull request. I had to constantly change the conflicts and all these kinds of things, and it was a total mess. So how did it go? Well, we launched the overhaul, and we kept having to revert that PR. And it's annoying having to revert a really big PR because you have to keep managing merge conflicts and things when you want to do a revert of the revert. And then you have a revert of the revert of the revert, and you know how that goes. So we had Jira tickets pouring in from disgruntled users, and it was very stressful. So what would we learn? Well, dark launch all the things. So when it came time to do it a second time, a few years later, we wanted to build dark launching into its DNA. So the first thing is you would create a feature flag, and this is just a little example here of what that might look like. We just have a YAML file, creating a new daily variable here, defaulting it to false. And then the second step is you want to check for that in your code. So here's just a little bit of code here that gives you an example of what this could look like. We use the Symfony framework. It's built in PHP. And you'll see here that we have this controller here that's sending you to a view depending on whether you've got the feature flag enabled, right? So right over here, it's saying if you have access to that, who you're logged in as, take you to this new cool view, otherwise send you to the old view. Pretty simple. Think less in terms of inserting tons of conditionals and more creating an alternate universe when you're wanting to do dark launching. This alternate universe will require conditional to somewhere, but you want to try to keep it as high level as you possibly can. And you saw there that the dark launching of daily chess really only required a single conditional. And if in doubt, duplicate. I love this quote by Sandy Metz where she says, duplication is far cheaper than the wrong abstraction. Something to keep in mind and remember often when you're dealing with these things. Now that being said, can you reuse old code when you're dark launching? Well, absolutely. The daily chess used a ton of code that was already on production. The criteria was this: if a discrete section of code didn't need to be modified in the new daily chest, you reused it. Otherwise, it forked it. So the last step is to flip the feature flag to true for an increasing percentage of production traffic. This right here is the really cool part. I'm not going to go into how you would actually go about building something like this. You're firmly in the realm of DevOps and ops at this point. But you can see here that you can say, look, let's send this to 1% of production traffic. Let's flip it to 2%. So that conditional that you saw earlier, let's have 12% of those people go to that. You can make it sticky so it sticks with the same users through multiple sessions across your mobile apps, your website, and things like that. And as we increase that percentage, you carefully monitor JIRA tickets and community forums and wherever those conversations about the bugs are happening so you can catch them before you release them to a larger audience. Now, software developers, no matter how hard we try, we will always ship bugs. We'd like to think that that's not the case, but it's just the fact of the matter. So the goal isn't to reduce the bugs. The goal is to reduce how many of your users are exposed to those bugs. It's a different way of thinking about it. If I can quote our CTO, our target is to not reduce bugs to nothing. Our target is that every bug is exposed to only one person before we are alerted and we fix it. Now, of course, your mileage may vary. Your dark launching method might look different from this. This is just what's worked for us. The basics of dark launching are universal, though, and I think that they're really simple at the top of it. So if you're not currently using dark launching, I recommend considering how this might help you in your delivery process. All right, well, thank you very much. I don't know if we have time for questions or... No questions. You have a question? Well, so when you, okay, yeah. So the question is, how do you determine when you say let's send this to 7% of production? How does that 7% get determined? I think that's what you're asking. So there's different drop downs. So that one I showed you was just based on user IDs. The thing we've built out, we could target by country, we could target by language, we could target it by mobile apps versus desktop, and you can even do it just random. So just a random 1% of traffic. It's a mobile API change that should be completely have perfect parity with an old system. It's not a new UX. It's a refactor maybe, and you want to drip that refactor out very carefully so you don't introduce bugs to a lot of people. The way you could do that is if you say let's send it out to 7%, you could say, okay, well, as traffic comes in, we have a bucket. We know we need 7% of people to get this. Has that bucket gotten filled yet? Oh, we haven't? Okay, let's flip a coin. Let's see if we should maybe put them in that bucket. And then you just iteratively slowly put people in that bucket. And then once it gets to that 7%, you say, okay, we're good. We want those to be persistent. You can use Redis or Memcache, something like that. You could persist it in the database if you have like a JSON blob or something there where you just wanted to have. You need some kind of persistence, though, right, for that. Does that make sense? That's a good question. So, what's that? Oh, yeah. So he's asking if we built all this from scratch. Generally speaking, so it's funny, there's only, of 30 people that are on the web team, there's really one guy that's been his brainchild putting the guts of that part of it together, and there's a lot of people that are consuming it. Most of the stuff that we build, we end up building from scratch. I mean, we'll use frameworks, we use Vue.js and things like that. But when you get to a certain scale, it's just a lot easier. You're swimming downstream when you're building your own stuff. So yeah, but for something smaller, it's a good question. There's probably some resources out there that could maybe help with that. Get started. Sorry, that's not a very good answer, but anything else? All right. Well, thank you very much.
All right. Oh, it's over there. Crap it all. How do I not mirror this? There it is. All right, sorry, had to get this to mirror displays. So I'm going to be talking about, my name's Dylan Allen, by the way. I'm going to be talking about LexBots. So just quick show of hands, how many of you are familiar with AWS LexBots? Excellent, good, glad to know. So LexBots are basically a chat bot that works very similar to Alexa, but you program the whole thing. And it's, so if you've ever developed an Alexa skill, it's very similar, but the bot itself is kind of stripped down, and it's something that you can use and integrate with web apps. There's a few different uses for them. Some common ones are you can attach it to a Facebook page so that whenever someone messages you, your bot responds to them and they can basically have a conversation. Another thing, in my job, we develop contact centers. So this is something we use for the natural language processing when you call somebody and it says, how can I help you today? And you just say something and it tries to figure it out, and then you yell at it and then it sends you to an agent. But we try to make it better than that. So I'm going to quickly go over, I don't know if you can read this, but the basic structure to a LexBot are intents, utterances, and slots. There's a few other pieces, but those are the core that you need to understand before you can really do anything. So an intent, what does the user want to do? You define the intent to say, these are the things that if someone says this, or this, they probably want to do this. And so then Lex uses its smarts to take your utterances, the second part, which are, I'd like to book a hotel, or I want to book a hotel, or any other version of that. You give it a bunch of options, it kind of figures it out. What are the other things that are similar to that? And it will match that up. It uses its machine learning to help you out with that. Slots are essentially your variables. So it's the data that the user will provide. Like, I want to book a hotel. Where would you like to book a hotel? And then you say a city. That's a slot that you could create to say. And so then you define that slot to say, I want to book a hotel in New York. And you could write that out, but put the slot name in that spot for New York. And it could basically pull that out of there and send that to your Lambda function or whatever else. Basically, it's going to be a Lambda function. It's AWS. Let's be real. So intent. I'm going to go a little deeper dive. So an intent is kind of like the main first building block of your bot. You define what it is that the user wants to do. You define the utterances, and you define the slots, all within your intent. And I'm going to go into the UI and actually show you how to do this in a minute, so don't worry if this all seems kind of hard to follow. And another thing that's great about this, there's a whole visual interface to build LexBots in AWS. You can also export it in a JSON format, modify the JSON and re-import it, so you can quickly copy from one to another, make changes without having to dig through menus and all that kind of stuff. So there's a pretty good user interface, and these are examples. So the slots are the next portion. That's how you collect the data. And so in this, and I have a chat bot that it's actually right down here hanging out. I'm going to show you how that works in just a second. But food. So this one is saying I'm trying to figure out what kind of food someone's talking about. And Amazon has built-in slot types for a lot of different things, like cities, numbers, food. There's a lot of options to choose from, so it kind of helps you. It already has its, the wealth of knowledge that comes from Alexa to figure out what all options people could use for this. Or you can create a custom slot type, and you can define your own values. For instance, if you had specific things, I just want people to say, basically the only things I'm trying to capture are a list of 15 things. You can list those 15 things, and then it will only be looking for those. Code hooks. So this is a portion where basically you attach it to a Lambda function, and this is what the JSON looks like. And so you've got your ARN from your Lambda function. And so whenever the LexBot collects information, if it's an intent, if it's a slot, it will send that information to your Lambda function. You can then do whatever you want, and then you can send back whatever response you want. So you can dynamically create your response all in JavaScript or Python or Go or whatever else is on in a Lambda function. So now I'm going to show you the bot. This is really simple, and I got to admit, I planned to put more work into this, but I was sick all week, so I did all this yesterday. Sorry. So I have a simple bot that I'm going to show you how it works, but basically it's a recipe bot. I'm tying into a Spoonacular or something like that API. So I can ask for so give me a random recipe, and then it's going to give me a random recipe. And then I can also say, how do I make hamburgers? And then it's going to give me this turkey burger. I said hamburgers, but turkey burger. It's not really a burger. Close enough. So this is an example of basically my Lambda function is taking that input, then it's hitting some APIs, putting a response together, and then sending it back to the LexBot. And this is just in chat format. Lex also does all of this with language. So I could click this microphone and actually say something, and it does its whole speech-to-text thing, and then it can also, it'll speak back with whatever voice you define, and there's a few options there. All right, now I'm going to go to, this is the AWS console. Is that better? The AWS console, and so here's my bot. Food info bot, and then here are my intents. I showed you two different intents, random recipe, search recipes. So here I just defined a list of utterances, so options of things someone might say whenever they're trying to get a random recipe. And then I've got no slots for this because it's very simple. It's just, I just want to know this is what you want. That's all I need to know. And then here is my code hook where I'm tying into a Lambda function. The default is return parameters to intent to the client. And so this basically isn't going to do anything. It's just going to return that. This is something that we'll use in contact centers whenever all you're trying to do is gather simple information and pass it on to the next system. But for here, and then this gives me a list of all of my Lambda functions, and then I pick that one. There's a lot more to it. There's response messages, a few different ways to make it a little bit more complex, initialization and validation. So what I'm doing is a fulfillment. There's a difference between fulfillment and initialization and validation. Fulfillment is what do we do once we've gotten everything we need? Initialization and validation is saying, okay, before we decide that this is what we need, let's let the function process it first and then decide what to do after that. So that's a small difference there. And then here's you can test your chatbot right here in the console, so it's exactly what I have in my web app. Works just the same. Now here I'm going to show you the search recipes. So the difference here is now I have a slot. I'm actually gathering that food item. So you see you just put it in your utterances however you want, and then here's where I define the slot. I said it's food is the name of it, the type is food, and then you give a simple prompt. What would you like a recipe for? So if someone was to trigger this intent without actually giving you food, giving you the food that they want to search for, it would reprompt to say, okay, well, what do you want? So it knows that it has or doesn't have that intent, and then it can respond accordingly. And you can have as many slots as you want in this. You can have as many intents as you want. The only caveat is if you were to put two very similar intents and your utterances are very similar, it's going to be hard for Alexa to kind of decide which one someone is trying to do. So the trick to getting these things to be accurate is just to clearly define what your intents are with the utterances. You have to give a lot of utterances too. If you only give 4 or 5, Alexa's pretty bad at figuring out connecting the dots. If you give it a lot, 15, 20, it's going to do a much better job and give you a much broader range of successes. Now I'm going to just show you real quickly. This is that Lambda function that I have in the back end. There's some basic helper functions that we use, elicit slot, and that's just to say I want you to go back to this slot and gather that information. So for instance, they didn't give me food, I need food, elicit slot, say okay, what type of food are you trying to prepare? And then it will, basically that way the LexBot's ready to accept that slot value. Close is exactly what you would assume. And then delegate is that validation thing where you're saying I want to delegate. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah. There we go. And now this is the meat of it. So there's a few things in here. We're gathering the transcript. So the intent request that we get from LexBot, it has the transcript that was given to you, has the intent that was triggered if there was an intent triggered, and all slots and their values. So you have all that information right there. And so what I'm doing is I'm just basically first saying, did it trigger an intent? If it did, then I'm going to pull out that intent, and I have a switch statement here for the two different intents, and I'm responding accordingly, calling to the API I have in a separate file just to make this code look cleaner. And then search recipe to where here, whenever I got to that search recipe intent, the next thing I'm doing is checking to make sure we have food. So that way we know what to search for. And then if we do, then great, we're going to go ahead and call that API. If not, then we are going to ask them what they would like a recipe for right here. And so the uses for this are pretty interesting. The call center stuff that we do, we have huge call centers for GE and big banks that take you through a lot of steps. And so what we do often is actually have multiple Lex bots, one for a specific purpose and then another one for the next purpose. So it pushes you through from one to the other to gather information in different contexts, which is much better than having one gigantic Lex bot to be all things to all people. It's a lot more difficult to manage. So that's pretty much all I had to show. I would have done more slides, but like I said, sick. Sorry. Any questions?
How would you handle multilingual stuff? Does that get complicated real quick?
Well, basically, oh yeah, so the question was how do you handle multilingual things with a LexBot? So basically the LexBot, you have to decide what language it is when you're creating it, and you can define that. There are, so yeah, here, so I'm going into the settings right here just to show you some of the other things. You can pick the voice, but, and maybe I have not actually had to do other languages, but you can pick, it might be whenever it's created. Yeah, well, okay. So it looks like I don't have the option to select another language. So they may not be support other languages at this point. But it looks like Lex is pretty new for AWS services. So I assume that they're probably working on that, but they don't have it. I know they have multiple languages for Poly for their speech service. So you can speak back in another language. But as far as the Lex bots, it looks like that's probably all we're limited to. I'm in North Virginia, so yep. Good question, though. Anything else? Oh.
What percentage match for the question do I have to hit for it to actually respond back correctly? So can you miss words and how many words?
I don't actually know what the bar is. The question is, what percentage match do you need to get in order for it to trigger an intent, or basically assume the user is saying what you think they're saying? I don't actually know what the percentage is. It does make its own judgment on that. And there's some metrics that are provided to give you, it'll show you what utterances people are using on your bot, which are failing, what, like say, this is what somebody said, I didn't know what to do with it. So it'll give you those as a way to kind of fine tune, so that when you can look at it and say, oh, this should have been caught, and then you add that to your utterances. But I don't know exactly the percentage breakdown of how it decides whether or not it's a good match. Anything else? So one standard deviation outside of the matrix. That's the answer to the question. All right, thank you very much.
I can't see the screen, Blixa. All right. So big. All right. So my name is Patrick Forringer. I'm a full stack developer here in Tulsa. And if you need Django work, I'm looking. So I wanted to, before I start, if you don't care anything about Python or know everything about the standard library, go to this website called 200ok.us and click on the vote button and vote on upcoming talks for 200ok. So, and it'll take 10 minutes to do that, so you can just do that while I'm doing the talk and you won't have missed anything. All right, cool. So I thought I'd go over maybe 3 different things if I have time that are in the standard library that provide some use. during normal programming in Python. So the first one is partial. And so if you're familiar with functional programming, you probably are very familiar with partials. It's pretty simple to use. You got essentially, it's wrapping a function. So I have a function up here called function with many args. It's got 2 arguments, which are a lot of arguments apparently for people that may be starting out in Python development. So I just pass it in to the partial function here, and I pass it the first argument. So I get back a function that when I call, if we look down here, right, I've called the new argfunc, and I pass in is good. My result should be content is good. And so if I actually go and modify this, I can see, oh, it actually is working and whatnot here. Here's the magic of tests running within your editor. So it's good to do. All right, so there's the first one. You can see that it's working. You can see that if we modify this, it shouldn't. It should just return content, right? Because we're no longer concatenating it with extra and whatnot. Yeah, you can see in the test. All right, so, and now I also have this one here, raises. So if I don't actually pass an argument in, normally with a Python function, you get a type error, right? It's like, hey, I can't, or I think we can actually test this out because I don't actually know Python very well. Just kidding. Okay, so if I remove extra here, right? So extra, this is none, this gets set to none, right? Like that, well, actually I know it does work, right? It passes type error. Because if I close that, oops, anyway, here. And I just do this, right? Oh, look, missing 1 required positional argument, extra, right? That's the actual exception that I get back. All right, so functions with partials with keyword arguments are a little bit different, and they're pretty useful, right? So here I have another partial function with keyword arguments. I'm passing in all the arguments, and I'm assigning them to a list, and I'm joining them into a little thing with underscore separators. So snake case, right? This is a very efficient snake case function that's very flexible, okay? Sorry, I didn't mean to get so emotional about my function. All right, so now you can see here we're passing in the more keyword argument, and that's one of our keyword arguments we're passing in, right? And so this one is defaulted to is okay, and so this gets set to is okay, and our result is starting later is okay, and this is referring to learning programming and stuff. And starting later is fine. You don't have to start when you're born. Start later, it's fine. So I have another one here I'm testing. I just need to say, oh, I'm gonna provide a positional argument which gets set to more. So I'm not actually, so you can use keyword arguments as positional arguments if you want to. So right, it's getting set to right now, and I'm also providing that optional keyword argument is great, and that also works, right? So it uses both of them. It overwrites them, and I can show you this is working. I'm just gonna destroy that test, and oh, I can actually see the difference here, and I can fix that. All right, so then here's a couple of errors or gotchas that happen with the keyword argument one. So I'm overriding the optional one with something, and I'm getting a type error back. And that type error isn't because I'm not passing a parameter, it's because I'm adding none to a list and then I'm joining it, right? So you can't concatenate a list and join a list and with something that's not a string. But anyways, so I just want to specify that gotcha. But anyways, you can see here if I comment that one out, it's going to error because there's a syntax error, and there we go. So here, what's pretty cool with the internal PyTest and Sublime, it actually puts on the line of code where the error is occurring. So I can check, hey, we're actually in the function, is it erroring? And you can see there, expected a string, got a none type. All right, any questions about partials? Pretty cool, right? Why would I use a partial, right? Well, sometimes you want to configure a function. Maybe you want to put a big bit of data and configure something and then pass that around or whatever. So you have maybe a configurator pattern or something. Partials are useful to configure some instance, maybe of a class and whatnot. I think you can use it with classes too. Like you could pass a class in and partially configure it so the arguments that get passed into the new statement on a class would, get passed in, and you could actually not instantiate the class until you needed it. So that's one of the things. All right, the next one, counters. Many times when you're working and you're given your interview test, you're like, oh, make sure these things are equal or have the same amount of characters in them and whatnot, and then you fail that because you start making for loops everywhere and there's nested, and then maybe they're you're calling another function and it gets crazy, right? Python has that built in. You can check and count characters. You can count probably numbers and other things. And I sort of went a little crazy here. I'm like, whoa, counters are cool. I can actually do so many things with counters, and I'm going to go through all of them. And that's actually not even all of them. So the basic concept of the counter is you can give it some sort of iterable. It's going to go look through everything in that iterable, and strings are iterable in Python. And it'll go and count all the occurrences of some value right within that iterable. And so I just use strings and lists and a couple of things, but you could do other things. Like you'd probably put like sets, and maybe not sets is a good example, but other things. Documentation is better than what I'm saying. But you can see here, I'm just comparing it to a dictionary. I'm saying, hey, A occurred twice, B occurred twice, C, 1, 2, 3, 5. And then let's break that, right? Let's kill this here. Let's kill that too. And so if we actually look through this comparison, we could see like 2 is 1 instead of 2. All right. So here I have another counter, and I'm expecting this counter. Oh yeah, I can count lists. So instead of just passing in, I don't know why I would do this, break up a string into a list of single characters and then pass in the counter, but maybe you have your reasons. It does the same result, right? All right, so test counter init with counts. You can actually hydrate a counter and say, here's a dictionary of values that I want you to store as the default. So if you have something like stored somewhere and you say, hey, pass it into the counter, these are my initial values, use them. So you can see here I created a new dictionary that has those same values, and the returned counter instance can be compared to a dictionary, and it's the same. We can demo this and destroy it, right? There we go. All right, so it can be incremented. Did I actually do incremented here? Oh, yes, I did. All right, so you can see here, this essentially is the copy paste of the test above. And then below, I'm going to say, hey, update. I'm going to pass in this additional string. Notice I'm not passing in a dictionary. It's just passing in, or getting past an iterable. It's like, hey, I need to add this to my internal counter. It's going to go through and calculate that. And you can see here that dictionary is updated with the additional count values. All right, so you got another one here. Yeah, and so I pass in a dictionary. So I'm actually saying, hey, update it with this additional either counter, dictionary of values, whatnot. Now it's going to add additionally all those things together. Okay, accessors. There's some pretty cool features. It's pretty fault tolerant. So here you can see in the dictionary that I'm passing into the counter, I don't have a D value specified. And if I try to ask it what's the value of D, it's just going to give me 0 because there's 0 Ds in this counter. It's not going to throw errors at you and whatnot. And A is set to A here. Arithmetic. So in Python, quite often there's a lot of cool operator functionality that you can do with different objects. And counter has a lot of that built in. So you can go and take 2 counters, subtract them. This one gave me a little WTF. I was like, I'm passing in like A equals 0, B equals, or 0 here, but it's throwing errors because the counter, if it doesn't have a value and initialize it with a 0 value, it just doesn't want that. It needs a value to be passed in. We can actually demo that here. So I say 0, pass it in. And it's like, hey, exception occurred, but you got a counter. Expected a counter 0, but got counter this. The more you know. Okay. So addition, you can see here we're adding, and I put a negative value in, and that negative value gets truncated from the counter, so it's no longer allowed to be used in a comparison. So positive minimums, here the minimum values that are positive with this operator, the ampersand. Maximum counter, so I'm saying here are these 2 counters, what are the maximum values of those between them? And it's got quite a few more, I didn't list them. Any questions? How much time do I have, Lixa? He wasn't counting. I was, but then I stepped up here and then I didn't set the timer. All right. Name tuple is a pretty cool new addition. Python 3 something or whatever. There's this fun little thing. So type notation was added in Python at some point, and you can do things like this where you do colon and then point and whatnot. And you're saying, hey, this argument should always have a point passed into it, a point instance. And if you don't include this, you will get tons and tons of errors. Oh, no, it's just not even working. It's not even doing my tests. Okay, whatever. I was hoping it would just show red everywhere down there, but so Python has this cool thing where you can import from future and say, hey, there's this future functionality that'll change the functionality of Python. And in this case, annotations allows you to reference instances or references of things before they're fully defined. So I'm inside the point class and I'm referencing a point, and it's allowing that to work. Anyways, name tuples. There's a couple different ways to construct it. This is my most favorable. You have essentially an abstract base class available on the typing module. And I'm just going in and saying, hey, there's a name tuple. It has two properties. They're both going to be ints. I'm typing them. You don't have to explicitly type them, so I can actually remove everything after the colon. It'll just let me put whatever I want in there, but in these cases, I want specific types. And you can actually like put a point in there too or whatever if you wanted. Don't look at operation here. This is intentionally complex because I wanted to try crazy things. But you can see here I've gone and I've done method overrides for add, subtract, greater than, less than or equal to. I also have a total property on here, and so that's just adding self y and self x. You can see here I'm referencing other property, so I'm referencing this total property here, and I'm using it for comparisons against another point. One other thing, the reason I did this is it's quite often when you were doing these greater than and less thans previously in Python, you'd receive an argument and you'd be like, hey, assert that this is the type that I care about, right? But in this case, now you actually get like a type error or something, I want to say, because you're passing in, say, a string or a number or whatever, and it'll complain at you. All right, and so here's the tests of name tuple. Well, does anybody want me to go over name tuple a little bit more? I was going to just go through the tests and show you what this code, like the outcome of it or whatever. Questions? Does it make sense? Maybe if we look at the tests, people will be more confused. Okay. So initialize a point, which is a name, now an abstract base class, or it uses abstract base class name tuple. It's our new class point. We pass in a couple positional arguments, x, y. So the order in which you define those attributes, you can pass in positionally. I believe you can do this and it won't yell at you. Okay, something is broken. You see that little red thing down there? We're gonna see what this is. Okay, it just doesn't like that. It doesn't like that. Yeah, so they're all passing. All right, so yeah, it didn't like the x equals. Oh no, I know why. X equals, and because you can't have non-keyword arguments after the first keyword argument. So if I did this and I took out that should still work. So you can actually specify with keyword arguments that are defined as the attributes on a name tuple, the values when you're instantiating it. If you have like a name tuple that has a lot of those attributes that have really long names that are more complex than an x and y coordinate system. All right, so subtraction, because I defined that functionality or I was doing a method override, now I have subtraction, and it should fail, but got this negative value because I'm subtracting 6 from 4, and now it's -2. And so one of the things I added is when subtraction gets a number, or I think in the case of point, just a number, and it's not an actual point, it just subtracts it from both values, so you just want to move that point in some diagonal direction. Wrong types, just testing that errors occur and whatnot, so I'm trying to pass in a string for subtraction. I'm going to get a type error and whatnot, and it says, hey, and this maybe error is not the best. It doesn't really, look, I got a little button here to press, but it doesn't work. All right. Let's see here. So there's addition there. Are you guys filling out that 200OK survey? I mean, I imagine some of you are like, whoa, no, I don't really care about this. Rod. Mm-hmm. So it's available in 2.6 without typing, the name tuple. And I believe like this. Yep. And so I like the class a little bit. It's a little cleaner. IMO. Yep, so least, I added a little least method. You can say, hey, what's the least value of these two? There's potentially an operator you could override to do the same comparison. I didn't feel like finding one that was similar. Most, greater than, I'm just saying, hey, here's the method override for, greater than, and it works. And I'm going to say, oh, this one is actually 15. No, that still works. I forget what I was doing with greater than, but I think I was like adding or something, or I don't know. Who knows how things work? It's broken, guys. Come on. Or what am I doing wrong? Somebody tell me. Oh, is it just? All right, whatever. That test is just going to pass forever because I'm not thinking. Less than. Okay, so greater than. By default, it provides a repr method, which is pretty cool. So in Python, you can say, give me a representation, like a string representation, a console representation of an object. By default, it'll just make a string that says, hey, here's the name of the name tuple, and then here's all the attributes attached to it. And let's save that and see if it breaks. Okay, something is up, guys. Like they're just, okay. Okay, what is this? What is this? All right, expected point by God point X, Y. I mean, that's working there. Maybe if I just kill this one and save this, there we go. All right. Maybe I can't have two tests running at the same time, even though I was able to do that like a lot before. All right, cool. So any questions about name tuple? I was sort of not really talking about name tuple. I was just like, here's all these method overrides. But you essentially, there's a lot of cool new data access type objects and classes in Python 3 that just simplify a lot of things, whereas before, say, you were writing a new object that has a lot of accessors and getters and whatnot, and like you were just writing a lot of code. This sort of simplifies it. There's also a new, I think, Python class called data dictionaries, which is sort of similar to this one, but it's a dictionary instead of a tuple. Yeah, it's fun stuff, fun new stuff. Any questions? What? I'm done. No, that's this. Oh, dang it. Dang it. This is the wrap up, and then this is done. All right, thanks, guys.
Okay. All right. How close do I have to be? Do I have to be this close? To put on a radio voice? What? You need to be in front of it, not on top of it. Okay, right in front of it. There you go. So I can't see you. All right, cool. Okay, so this is going to be easy. Nothing super complicated. But how many? Now, what have I done? That's not what's on my screen. Which one do you want? Yeah. Give me a hand here. How about, where is it? You're not seeing any of this, are you? Got it. Just a second. We're getting any closer? You're going to have to show me where it is, because I don't know where it is on here.
I don't use maps. I have no idea where it is either.
All right. Someone? Anyone? There it is. Thank you. Sorry. Yay. All right. Okay. All right. So we're going to start with.
We cannot hear you.
Well, there's a big old microphone in my face, so. All right. Let's Here we go. Okay, so how many people? First of all, this is very Python. We've already done Python. So, how many people are active, like doing hackathons, or just your own private, having fun, trying to write some kind of project? Please, somebody raise their hand. Okay. All right. What's the first thing you do? Everybody builds their one-page app, and then they need a data store. They need something, right? Okay, that's great. We're gonna make it local. Okay. If you want to make it easy and retrievable, you're going to do JSON. Oh, but really what we need is a database so that we could do queries against it. Then once you do that and you come up with some kind of local hacky thing for querying your JSON file, then you realize, oh, I need a real database. But you don't want to do a database because a database means you got to figure out what you're doing. And because it's fun, you don't want to do that. You don't want to build models. You don't want to put any structure on it. You just want to get to coding. That's where I am a lot, okay? So I discovered this thing, TinyDB. It's a library. It's very easy. You can go out here, go look for TinyDB. You can see the instructions. You get a nice little database interface. You can write queries. You can have fun with it. Okay, so let's just look at the code real fast. This is what the code looks like. Can we all see that? Real simple. You instantiate a file called db.json or whatever you want to call it. It's smart enough to be able to create the file on its own if you run this code. So we're going to go ahead and do that. I'm going to find one of these. Whoop. There we go. All right, so what we just did was we created 2 records and we did a query on it. And if you're curious, I want to see it. There he is. There you go. So now you have a database. You have fields and you can do queries. That's great. And you go to town and you can do nested queries and you can build out your whole records and you can have fun building your app. Once you've built your little app and you want to show it to your friends, all of a sudden you don't want to take your laptop with you every time you want to show it to them, so you need some kind of distributed store. That's where the fun part comes in. So you read the documentation and you learn that you can extend it. And what you can do is you can extend it to an S3 bucket. So 2 things you're going to find I've got this on a GitHub repo now, as this is the middleware, all of the middleware that you need to extend this to an S3 bucket. Basically, you're overriding and telling it how to store the data on an S3 bucket of any kind of choice, and then away you go. So then this is all the special code you need. Once you have that one file that tells it how to store data, now you're instantiating your database. Same way, same file name, everything else, and it'll show up out there. So just so you believe me, this is my bucket, and there he is. Doesn't have much in it right now, but you can do. We're gonna do this live. Hopefully it'll work. Now we're going to stop in a second. Okay, what we're going to do is now we have this database and we're going to add some records to it. And now what we want to do is just do a query. So here's the one with Luke. If we want to query it, let's do the Jeremy one. Oh, I spelled his name wrong. I know how to spell Yaya better. No, I don't. How do you spell your name? Huh? Is that right? Yeah, that's right. Oh, my database isn't working then. I probably did. I'm not going to sit here and debug it for everybody. The point is that your data sits out on an S3 bucket. You can play with it. You can change your models all day long. It's out there. You can take your one-page app. You can send it off to the data and play with it. You figure out what you want to do. Then, when you're ready, you can graduate it to a real live database. No, you can't concurrently write to this thing. It's a file sitting in an S3 bucket. It's not ready for you to hit it multiple times with, 150 clients, but you can use it to demo what you're doing and depend on it being there. So that's it. It's not a very long lightning talk, but this is kind of the thing that we're always looking for in these hack situations, when we don't want to sit and define a database and define models and do all of that stuff. So there it is. You can find it on, I'm Jay Dungan on GitHub. You can find this repo. You can copy the storage middleware. You can make it better if you want. So that's it. Any questions? Questions? All right. Thank you. Yay.
All right. So I think that's it, right? No other lightning talkers? Okay, cool. Thanks for coming out, everybody. There is probably food left over. If you just want to grab an entire box of pizza and take it home for later, that's totally fine. Otherwise, it just sits in the 36 degrees north fridge until Hans gets here, and then he eats everything in sight. So, oh yeah, Hans isn't here anymore, but I'm sure if he showed up, he would eat it all. That's about it. So if you want to hang out, actually, we're supposed to get out in about 6 minutes, so you don't have a lot of time to hang out. If you do want to chat, a lot of people head right next door is Prairie Brew Pub. They serve food all the way until 10, and they do have drinks and stuff over there. They have kombucha and all kinds of good stuff. So if you want to grab somebody and have a chat about one of the lightning talks or whatever, you can head over there. Other than that, thanks for coming, and we will see you in April. Bye.